This live presentation was produced in Ashland, Oregon by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. RVML relies on the support of our volunteers, members, and donors to organize and present these programs. For more information about this presentation, or to borrow, download, or purchase other recordings from our catalog, please visit our website at rvml.org.
Wow, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I feel extremely honored to be able to talk about the witch hunts tonight. This is an important part of our history that has been overlooked for most part and hasn't been processed very much. And by all the emails and all of the conversations that I have had with women and some men over these past few days after Jordan invited me to talk about this, I can tell you that we really need to talk about the witch hunts. We need to talk about who we are as women, that we are the healers, we are seers, we are the sorcerers. We are the ones that are connected to this earth. We are the ones that have the flows of the earth come up through us. And we need to stop denying this. And that's what the witch hunts really did was, the witch hunts silenced us. They silenced us to not talk about our inherent powers that we have. So we're going to talk about that tonight. We're going to walk through the history of it, and we're going to look at how the witch hunts have manifested in how we act today. And I think you'll probably see some parallels as we go along. So, what is the history? Well, the history actually began, if we take a look at what historians say, the witch hunts began in about 1435, and they went until 1750. Now, during that period of time, there was 100 years where it was the most egregious against mostly women, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So we're talking mostly about a period tonight between 1550 and 1650, although again there were outliers on both of those, and even outside of that where there were witch hunts that are noted in trials. But basically we're talking about the 100-year period where it was the witch craze, and I mean it was crazy. So where did this all happen? Well, mostly it happened in the countries of Germany, Switzerland, Scotland, and France. That's where it was really the most concentrated, although there were a few in other places. Like, for instance, though, in Spain and Russia and Italy, they had witch hunts, but they killed maybe 2 or 3 witches. It wasn't a huge thing. It was the other countries where it was so large. But there were also witch hunts in the other European countries. And in Sweden in particular, I just read a story about an official who decided that a majority of the people there were witches. And before he was stopped, 60 women were killed, 14 boys under the age of 15 were killed, and 40 children were beaten with a rod because they were thought to be witches for a year. Tonight we have the really great pleasure of having a song that was composed 80 years after the end of the witch hunts. A composer was traveling through Sweden, and he was told the story of a witch, or a woman, who was accused of being a witch. He was told about her story and how she came to be burned. And so we have Bjork here tonight to give us this song.
First, I'm going to read the words to the song. Here on the mountain lie the woman's blackened bones, the bones of the woman who was burned at the stake last spring. Here on the mountain lie the woman's blackened bones, the bones of the woman who was burned at the stake last spring. Now you will hear the story of the red fire. You will hear how the woman came to be burned at the stake. The woman got some sticks or branches from a tree. She took the sticks and she stuck them into a wall. Slowly she stepped to the wall. But from the sticks, with trembling hands, she milked for her hungry little children. But from the rich priest's cow came the sweet milk. The children got to watch their mother burn at the stake. Här på berget ligga gummans svarta knotor. Hon som i våras här brann upp på bål. Här på berget ligga gummans svarta knotor. Hon som i våras här brann upp på bål. Nu ska du få höra sagan om röda elden. Höra hur gumman i bålet satts att brinna. Gumman hon tog vita stickor av furu. Men sina stickor satte hon i en mur. Sakta hon steg till muren och ur stickorna darrhänt mjölkade hon åt barnen och små. Men ur den rika prästens ko var den söta mjölken. Barnen fingo stå vid moderns bål.
Is that better? Yeah. That was pretty incredible, wasn't that? Haunting lyrics of a woman being burned at the stake because she was accused of being a witch. Just to prove to some degree of how insidious the witch hunts were, in Germany in particular, like I said, that's where the witch hunts really were the absolute worst. And that will become a particular point that I want you to remember later on in this speech. But in Germany, in the 3-year period in the town of Cologne, there were 250 women were killed as witches. In Bamberg, in a 6-year period, there were 900 witches killed. In Württemberg, there were 1,200 women killed in a 6-year period. Can you imagine what happens to the psychology of people when that many women are condemned to die? By neighbors, by friends, by acquaintances. I think it's important for us to just remember that this wasn't usually a decree that came down from on high. This was neighbor to neighbor. These were people who knew each other that were claiming that the other person was guilty. And interestingly enough, at the beginning of the witch hunts, about 90% of those who accused a woman were men. By about the midway through the witch hunts, it was about 50-50. It was about 45% men and 55% women that were doing the accusing. Now, there's lots of reasons for this, and some of it had to do with the shift from land. But as men had the right to say what was wrong, how a woman was a witch. later it became that the healers really got targeted. The healers that, as allopathy came in, and they decreed that they wanted the power to overcome and get rid of those healers, those intuitive women, then those women were also executed. But none of this really explains the numbers, because the scholars today are saying somewhere around 100,000 women and men overall were burned, hung, and drowned during the witch hunts. Now, this is a highly debatable. Some say there was only 40,000, some say there were 2 million plus. So no one really knows for sure, but we're doing a pretty good guess at, if we say 100,000, at least we're being conservative. First time I've ever been conservative in my life, but there it is. But of that percentage, 80% were women, 20% were men. And of those 20% of men, the ones that were accused of being witches were men who stood out in society. They didn't follow the norms of what being masculine was. There was also a connection that was made between homosexuals and witchcraft, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. So it was homosexuals, men who stood out, who did not conform to the norms of the society. And also some men stood up for their women. And once they stood up for their women, they were accused of being a witch also. So it was a lose-lose situation. Nobody won in this. Was it profitable? Well, for the witch hunters, of course. Was it profitable for the towns? No. It was very, very expensive to have all these trials. I'm sorry, I'm recovering from a cold. In fact, in Scotland, they even levied a tax against themselves to pay for the firewood to burn the witches. That's how desperate it was. This was not an easy time for counties to be burning witches. But let's remember that this was a time of great turmoil. They had just been through the Black Plague. 1/3 of the people had died. There was the commercial revolution, which took people out of a feudal system and into a capitalist economy. And so what did that do for a society? To come out of being in the rural area, to come out where you are connected to the land, where women and men were fairly equal. Not that men were still on a little bit higher on the hierarchy, but women were not indebted to men to have their food or their home. But once they moved into that urban center, once they came into capitalism, then that all shifted. And women didn't know what their part was. They didn't know what they were to be doing. So we had two societies that were side by side, kind of crunching and having a difficult time together as women tried to be who they were in the past. When they lived on the land, they worked in the ground, they had the flows of energy come up through them from the earth, and now they were stuffed into a city. And a lot of those women were artisans, and at the very beginning the guild said, fine, you can be in here. But then the men realized, oh my gosh, they're taking away some of our profits. We don't want them in our guild anymore. So they took them out of the guild, and they said the women couldn't be in guilds any longer. Now what that did to women was it put them on the periphery of the economic system. They were then marginalized. They no longer had the ability to make money, so then they were the poor. And historians say that the majority of the women who were persecuted were single, either by becoming a widow or else because they simply never got married, or else, and they were poor. That was the majority of women. Now, the witch hunters, what they would do is they would move into an area, and again, these guys made money, which, by the way, of all of those, I just gave you a number for the number of people who were executed, but then we also have the percentage of people who were the executors, the judges, the torturers. Those were 100% men, 100% men. But where was my point going with that one?
The underclass, taking away jobs.
Taking away jobs, okay.
On the outskirts.
On the outskirts. Women got marginalized. That's what happened. Women lost as they moved from the country where they had a voice, they could speak, they said what they needed to say. They were a very, what would be considered now, loud women. When they moved into the city and when Christianity said, oh my gosh, you know what? You're supposed to be this demure person. You're supposed to be quiet. You're supposed to be repressed. And when they made that move, we had women butting heads against, what am I? What am I to do? When they went to trial, the women who before knew that they could stand up and say, I'm not a witch and you're wrong and this is why, now found themselves that their voice was the worst thing they could use. That's what was used against them. Because if you were loud and obnoxious, you were definitely a witch. There was no doubt about it. You signed your confession as a witch if you were loud, if you defended yourself too much. There was almost no way to get out from underneath once you were called a witch. There was almost no way. But I want to tell you about the confessions, because torture was legalized in the 1400s for the witch hunts. And that was really imperative because what happened was a confession meant you were guilty, without a doubt. And to have these women confess meant they had to be tortured. The trial records show that very, very, very few women confessed to being a witch without being tortured. Now, I think that speaks to women's courage and strength. Because, I'm going to paint you a picture about the tortures. Not because I want to give you nightmares tonight, but because I think that we somehow distance ourselves from that. And I know that for myself, I hear the word torture. I hear the word torture today. We're still torturing people as we're meeting here tonight. Our government is. But I think that we somehow get so removed from it that it becomes like another word in a vocabulary, like peacemaker, I don't know, something like that. But so I want to paint a little bit of a story for you. And for the men who were persecuted as witches, they were stripped and had a loincloth on. They were put on the rack or the wheel, and they had every bone in their limbs broken many times. If the torturer was a good torturer, he never broke the skin. He just broke bones. Now for women, if I start crying, help me out here, you all can cry with me. When the women were tortured, it had to do with the sexual reproductive organs and the breasts. Lots of times burned, many times mutilated, always very painful. So we had a difference in how they were tortured. Now, even after the woman confessed, and sometimes these tortures went on for a day or two, sometimes they went on for several days. But after the women confessed and they said, yes, I am a witch, they would go, exactly, they would go before the judge to confess. And when they did that, their confessions were very, very detailed, and I'll tell you why. Because when they were being interrogated by the judge gave them leading questions like, did you ride a mare through the sky on the night of August 5th? And did you go to a cave in X place and meet with a coven of other witches? And did you eat baby's flesh? Because that was a big thing. And the biggest thing, though, was, did you copulate with the devil? Copulation and devil, those went together. And that's how homosexuals got connected to the witch hunts. Because if they were going to copulate with the devil, obviously they had witchcraft too. So we see that this is how it happened. Now, once the judges had implanted that in the women's head, then it would have been easy to confess in such minute detail, because you already had the details. So that's what women did. They gave great detail about how they were witches, which of course just made them more, definitely signed their death warrant. Once, though, they had confessed, then when they were taken to where they were to be executed, and again, a lot of it was burning, some of it was drowning, and some of it was hanging. But when they went to that place of execution, and I'll talk about it burning right now, This is a story that is not too uncommon, unfortunately. But the woman would be stripped, and in all of these, the woman is stripped to her waist. In lots of cases, the woman's breasts would be torn from her chest by hot tongs. And then the breast would be stuck into her mouth, or the breast would be, or her face would be beaten by the breasts. It's really hard to imagine, isn't it? It's really hard to take that all in, that actually could happen. But it did. It's all in court records. Everything I'm telling you about is something that was in the court trials. And the children, and if the woman had a husband, had front row seats at their executions. So they watched as their mothers burned to death and went through this horrible, horrible torture. Like I said, the geography of the witch hunts was so varied. And there was an endemic witch hunt, and then there was an epidemic witch hunt. And the endemic witch hunts were when they would take one witch at a time, and they were probably spread out over time. The endemic ones are where there was a witch craze, where I was talking about earlier about hundreds of witches being killed in a very short period of time. I know it gets pretty emotional. Let me find my place. So why did this happen? Why did this happen? This insanity. Never before or after have we known of a culture that killed the very beings that would procreate the next generation. Never have we ever seen where women have been singled out as if they were a different race, to be denigrated. I mean, we see this now. We've seen across our history where a race will be picked out, and they'll say a race has this problem and this problem and this problem, and we need to get rid of them in our society. But never women until this period of time. Even though, and can we claim misogyny? Probably. And I'll get back to that in a little bit too. But mostly we know that the witch hunts happened in areas where the government and the church were the weakest. If the church was strong and the government was strong, the witch hunts didn't happen. But let's remember again, let's go back and remember that we were in a time of turmoil. There was, like I said before, the Commerce Revolution. There was a scientific revolution, which again brought in the allopathy and other good things for us. There was also the 100 Years' War, the 30 Years' War, the Spanish Inquisition. Need I go on? It goes on and on. It ended, and of course the Reformation, which I want to talk about. But we also had the Enlightenment Period that began in about 1665. So it was at the end of the witch hunts. In the Enlightenment Period, what did that do for us? It brought us in humanitarianism. It brought us in that logical reasoning that somehow got lost over the past of this. And Descartes was a big instrument in bringing down the witch hunts. Descartes was very instrumental in helping women not be hunted anymore. So how about that Reformation? How about that? Well, what the Reformation did was, there was a lot of upheaval, but the church wasn't losing its power. I think that's debatable. I think there were a lot of things that were in play for this, because the Vatican was still very, very powerful at that time. And they just had different ways that they could put the screws to us. The Vatican at that time had a different way of bringing us in and controlling us. So they didn't have to burn witches. And actually, if you look at the trial records, very few, in fact, hardly, I don't know if there was even one. Let's say there wasn't even one. Oh, we'll say there was one. We'll give them one. They didn't burn the witches. They actually if a woman was accused of being a witch, the church courts would let them off if they would repent. Not so with the civil courts. The civil courts were 90% of the women that were said to be a witch, they were killed. They simply were killed. Oh, that was a point I wanted to make earlier was that, again, like over this span of time and geography, there's none of this happened everywhere. Some of it happened everywhere, but none of it happened everywhere. And the women oftentimes, and the men, would be killed before they went to the fires. So in other words, they'd be strangled, or they'd be put into a machine called the garret, which seems to be as torturous to me as anything else, but it actually did kill someone. But what it looked like was a collar around the neck made out of steel, and in the back was a rod, and the rod would enter the back here and come out here, and it would kill someone. So some people were actually saved from having to go and burn to death by having this garret. Yeah, some saved, huh? Anyway, what the Reformation also brought us was Martin Luther, and it brought us John Calvin. What did Luther do for women? Nothing. What he did was he supported the witch hunts, encouraged the witch hunts, and what he did was he took that aesthetic ideal out of the Catholic Church, and he said, you know what, marriage is the best thing. Marriage is now the ideal. So you don't want to go and be a nun. You don't want to go and be a monk. You want to get married, because that's going to save the sanctity of our community. And of course, Calvin, what he did was he persecuted homosexuals. He's the one who really brought in the fact that homosexuals were perverse, and they needed to be killed as much as the witches did. So we have both of those people to thank us for helping us out. Well, you know, before pre-modern Europe, the goddess was revered. The goddess was thought to have incredible powers because, of course, she did. The goddess was the one who brought in the rain. The goddess was the one who nourished the earth and nourished the people. It was her that helped with bringing back the aliveness of the planet. So we worshipped, we as in all people in the European countries, worshipped the goddess pre-1300 really. She was still very highly thought of. And you can see this. In the Christian tradition, the shamans were very respected. And you can look at the mystics that still are actually very highly revered. So in fact, you have to hear this. The Christian church actually said before 1450 that if you believed in witchcraft, that you were wrong, because there was no such thing as witchcraft. That's what the church said. Now, after 1450, they came out and they said, got a problem here, there's witchcraft. Yep, and it's mostly women. But some of that had to do with the creation of this, the Malleus Maleficarum. And Pope Innocent VIII, he had a papal bull, and he wanted something produced that showed who witches are, how to execute them, and what the procedures of all of this would be. And Kramer and Springer came up with the Malleus Maleficarum. Now, this could be called a scholarly book. It's a text. It became what was the codification of women, not just witches, but women. It is pornography. That's what it is. It's pornography. And what it does, it says that women aren't very bright, we're not very strong, and we can easily be seduced by the devil. Now, it also brings up a lot of other things in here, like how to find witches amongst all of those good Christian, God-fearing women. It also talks about how the witch's mark that I talked about earlier, how to find that. It also talks about how to, once you find them, how to persecute them, how to torture them, and how to execute them. That's all in this book. But the most interesting part about this book that I think is pertinent to today, like all of this is the fact that they were consumed with the idea that a witch could take away a man's penis. This was huge. It was terrifying. It's the worst thing a man could have happen to him.
Got him real scared.
It did. So there's a whole story in here about how a young man is out with his girlfriend and he decides to dump her. So he dumps her and he goes home and he discovers that his member is gone. It has disappeared. Well, he finds her the next day after he's talked to some person, and he finds her and he says, "Return my member, return my health to me." And she says, "I didn't do it." And he takes her and he strangles her until she's blue in the face, and he says, "Give me back my health." And she says, "Oh, okay, I will." And with a touch, he has his penis back. Now, according to the Malleus Maleficarum, that really happened. It does question whether or not a woman can actually take away the penis or whether they just make it disappear. But either way, it's not good. It's just not good. But what this did for women was it defined who a woman was in relationship to the penis, because the penis suddenly became the thing that the woman could overcome. They could take it away. By gosh, we really could be castorizing bitches or witches at the time. What they said was that, how do I put this plainly? That a woman could take away a man's privileged life, the sanctity of marriage. They could create chaos. They could take away the penis. Everything that a man feared was what a witch could do. That sets us women up to be pretty powerful, doesn't it? Trust me, guys, none of us women want to do this at all. Not even close. But if you'll recall, I'm going to do a fast forward here and then come back. But the fast forward is to Lorena Bobbitt. Remember her? We have a terribly high incident of domestic violence in this country. It is worse than any other industrialized nation. But the media decided to take Lorena Bobbitt's case and just skyrocket it to celebrity status. Why? Why was this fascination in our culture with the woman taking away the penis? Because it's the one thing that men really fear the most. The deepest, darkest fear a man can have is that his member is going to be gone. Am I right? So the media covered this, but what happens for women who do stand out? Lorena Bobbitt, what she did was, in a moment of defending herself, removed what she thought would help disable the man that she was being beaten by on a regular basis. But how about Anita Hill? Anita Hill, who was also called a castorizing bitch by the media. Not just someone outside, but by the media. She was portrayed as the person who was taking away the man's prerogative. That puts us women in a very difficult situation. We can't stand up for ourselves, or we're castrating someone, and yet we have to remain in silence? Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. Oh, by the way, this book, just to show you how popular it was, it's not like it came and went. Again, it was published in the 1435, and there were 29 editions in 200 years, a little less than 200 years, 29 editions in 200 years. It sold more copies than the Bible. No, I'm sorry, it didn't sell more copies than the Bible. It was the next to it. So the Bible just outdid it by a little bit in sales. That's how widespread this was. Some say it was on the table of every judge in Europe. Some say that, that's a little bit of a stretch, but certainly we know that the witch hunters used it, the torturers used it, the executioners used this book because it was the defining thing on witches. There were some others that were made. There were some other books and later books that sort of redefined what that witch was, but this was really the one that made the biggest impact. And by the way, Kramer and Springer both got ousted. I shouldn't say they got ousted, they just got demoted in the church hierarchy a few years after this came out. So the church finally did say, you know what, this really isn't right. You really shouldn't torture women with this book. Do it with other ways, but not with this one. Well, the folklore of the pre-modern Europe also had a lot of castration in it. The oak cult and the barley cult both use the moon, the cycle of the, or not the cycle, but the sickle of the moon and the sickle that one uses to harvest as a metaphor for castrating a man. Of course, then the goddess would, regenerate him and bring him back to life, and he'd be better than ever and stronger and better looking and more rich or whatever. But that was the metaphor, and that was their folklore. But they knew it was folklore. That's kind of the difference between then and now, maybe. They knew it wasn't for real. We have a tendency to think it's for real. But anyway, what that set up was, it wasn't such a stretch for those people who had that kind of a mindset to then transfer that to Eve as a castrating bitch. It wasn't a far stretch. But I want to back up just a minute, because everything that was in here was something that they didn't make all this up. This was stuff that was already in their culture. This was information that they just gleaned from other stuff. They had a preoccupation with the penis, without a doubt, but they didn't just create this out of thin air. This was what was building as Christianity built. Anyway, Eve is a castrating witch. Came right out of the Bible. It was the temptress. The penis became that part of the male's anatomy that could either send him to heaven or send him to hell. And the witch, or the woman, was the one who was the temptress, who would make a movement, as the Malleus says, make a movement in the member. And that could certainly send a guy the wrong direction when he dies. So in other words, what I'm saying is that as men's privilege got wrapped around that penis as his privilege, his status in the community, became part of that icon of the penis, then what it did was it set women up to be the ones that were the downfall of that. Right out of the Bible, we're talking this, Eve, downfall of society, man's first sin. And so if a man had lusted after a woman and caused his member to move, as the Malleus says, that was her fault, not his. But I'll tell you what, the way that the authors of the Malleus Maleficarum explain this, that they were indeed, the reason God had this happen, the reason God gave witches the power over the penis was because of Adam's fall. Adam disobeyed God. Therefore, his penis shall not obey him. God's decree. That came right from St. Augustine. And the Maleficarum, Malleus Maleficarum, they grabbed that and they said, this is why, witches have this say over the penis. It sets women up again to just simply not be in a position of power. It puts us in a position of subservient. It puts us in a position where it makes us evil. Oh, and by the way, every time that Eve's daughters make that member move, we're just reduplicating the thing that Eve did. Let's remember, this was Eve's fault, right? It was Eve's fault. So what's the effect of this? It kept us silent. It kept us in a mode of repression. We didn't talk about women. We didn't talk about our innate powers. We didn't say, I'm a healer. We didn't say, I'm a seer. We didn't say, I have the mystical, magical powers that are mine. They're my innate powers. Because I think this is a feminine planet, and I think most people think this is a feminine planet. I think we can all agree that in femininity, the two things that are crucial to that are water. This is a water planet. And so that the spirituality and the sexuality that is part of our planet flows through women. Guys, I hate to tell you this, but you're a guest here. You're our guest. You're a very welcome guest, and we want you here. Trust me, we want you here. We like you here. You wouldn't be here. But it's our planet. It's our planet. And when we deny ourselves, we stop the flow of the currents that come up through Mother Earth and over to us and out of us. We stop the flow of creativity. We can see this happening because there are fewer and fewer species on this planet as more species die off, as we have extinction happening. So we see this happening, that there is something going on about the aliveness and the creativity. Nature loves to create. Nature loves to regenerate. That's what she does best. And that she is also us. It's reflected in us. It's my belief, and several other people, hopefully in the room, that women are the window to the world for men. That men look to us for how good their world is. Now, what happens if we shut down? What happens if we deny who we really are? What happens when we repress our own nature? We deny ourselves the pleasure, obviously. We do not deny ourselves the pleasure of our containment. But what we also do is we set up for the man that he can't see his world is good. He can't see that his world is peaceful and calm. And so I'm going to get back to this. But so the systems that men build when they can't understand that their world is a safe place to live become systems that are destructive. And that's what has happened. We're in this together. You know, we're just in this together. There's no blame here. I gave you statistics so I could point to the fact that this isn't mostly a women's issue. But the truth of the matter is we're all in this together. And if I can use the words of Eudora Welty, who's one of my favorite authors, I really don't want to point in judgment. I want to part a curtain. I want people to understand what happened. And I want us to really move into allowing women to be their sexual, sensual, creative selves. Because when we get that, when we understand that women can do this, then men are going to make better systems. When women are truly women, men are going to make better systems. We're not going to have the systems that we have now. We're going to have better ones. Are you with me? All right. Well, there were 300 years of the burnings, 300 years to have that fear ingrained in us, in ourselves, in the grooves of our brain. And then we had another 300 years where that has, well, for about 150 years, we didn't talk about it. There isn't literature out there about it. For about 150 years, there wasn't things written about it. And then in the early 1990s, people started writing about the witch hunts again. And they wrote, and they wrote, and they wrote, and they wrote, until I'll tell you, you can't read it all. I've tried, you can't. There's a ton of stuff out there about the witch hunts right now. But are we processing what happened during the witch hunts? I don't think so. I think we need to name the truth. We need to name what happened. So I have some questions for you. Mostly, well, to both of you, both men and women. Do we die each time we deny our true nature? Do we die each time we deny our true nature? Is silence, repression, and denial of what we know and what we have to offer stopping women's aliveness? Is silence preventing us from healing? Is fear from the very perverse and horrific sexual nature of the tortures that our great-grandmothers went through residing in us today? Do you know our grandmothers are here with us tonight, by the way? I asked them to come and share this space with us, so they're here in mass. Does fear suppress women's creativity? And above all else, how does this affect the men? How does this affect the men? Well, that intergenerational fear that I was talking about earlier, I think we can prove through quantum physics that actually happens. We know from quantum physics that our cells actually have consciousness. If they have that, they have memory. Was it passed down to us? Yes. Was it a social construct? Yes. It's definitely a social construct that we still deal with the way the word witch is being used, the way the word bitch is being used, because remember, they're synonymous now. Synonymous? Is that the word I want? Yes. They're synonymous, and if you're calling someone a bitch, you might as well be calling her a witch. And we don't want to be called witches, do we? We don't want to be called witches because it sets up a fear in us, because we have had this for 600 years of persecution. It sets up a fear in us that it could happen again. More questions? No? Okay. But you know what? No matter what that fear has done to us, we as women, as nature, have the ability to regenerate. We don't have to keep that fear with us. That's my true belief. And as Eli Ellenwood said, who happens to live here in town, she said, women are charged with the responsibility to speak our wisdom, speak our truth. We're charged with this responsibility. We have to do it. So the intergenerational fears definitely do bring up past memories. I've heard of several over this past course from women. So I want you to examine those and talk about them. And I want you to look at your own personal journey of being silent. Because we all have this. Women, we have a personal journey of being silent that we need to break. And when we talk about our insights, our spiritual knowing that comes through us, when we talk about that, what it does is it brings up disbelief in other people. It just happens. It does. And this can be very damaging. It can be very damaging. When you speak your truth and someone doesn't connect with that truth, it hurts. But here's what we can do about it. We can expand and deepen our compassion. First off, we need to deepen our compassion for ourselves, number one. And then deepen the compassion for others that don't understand, that can't connect to our truth. That's how we're going to heal. The other thing we need to do is we need to be receptive. We need to be receptive to our grandmothers. They're here. They're holding us. They're supporting us. We need to be receptive to the Gaia memory that is in us. We need to be receptive to the flows of the earth that flow through us just naturally. We need to open up and be receptive to this. Secondly, we need to support each other. Women, we've got to support each other. We don't have an option anymore, you know? We need to support each other to speak out. We need to support each other in standing up for who we are. So please, support your fellow women here. You know, it's my great desire, my passion, that we become, us in this room, women on this planet right now, become the truest expression of the feminine that this planet's ever seen. That the flows of aliveness come through us, and our sexuality, which we are very proud of, flows back in. Thank you.
You mentioned that the Catholic Church, you kind of exonerated the Catholic Church.
No.
That was the impression I got.
No. What I said was, I said the church courts didn't persecute the witches the way the other courts did, the secular courts. The churches were very instrumental in the witch hunts, but they, in the courts, did not persecute the witches. That's the difference.
So you're saying that the Catholic Church pursued the witches, but there was a different mechanism that they used to go ahead and prosecute them.
Yeah, I think Sherry wants to.
It's the nunnery. It's the nunnery. That was a systemic application within the Vatican. And the healers and the seers were subsumed within that enslaved population that went on for many years.
And also, I mean, here's the other part of it, is that the castration that was done by women was a projection, because the Catholic Church had castrated a lot of the males, the young males, so that their voices wouldn't rise, and they'd have, you know, these wonderful melodic choirs. So, you know, most, like I said, again, and this book, the Malleus Maleficarum, came from the Catholic Church. You know, this was theirs. So no way did I ever say they're not good. I'm just saying they didn't burn witches.
Well, because it was my understanding that this all came through the Dominican priests who were in the
These were Dominican monks that wrote the book.
And that the Inquisition has never been rescinded. It's still going on.
Okay.
And it started in Pope Pius II when the magic people, the Elbe, the actual bloodline of Yeshua, came into southern France, up into Avalon and up into Provence, and they had the strongholds
with
there.
The Cathars and
so when the Pope came down and the cardinals came down and wanted those people to kiss their ring, they wouldn't do it because they were of the blood lineage of Yeshua. They were of the blood lineage of the people. They had all the books.
Oh, the church killed a lot of people.
And so they sent down 40,000 troops, then 100,000 troops. Over 400 years, they wiped out millions of people.
Yeah, absolutely. But not the witches. That's my point. Just not witches. They killed everybody else. Just not witches. Other questions?
Until the 1550s. Okay.
What's your understanding of this idea that cats were killed along with witches because they were witches' familiars, and then there was an overpopulation of rodents in the cities, leading to the bubonic plague, and then witches were blamed for curse of the devil.
Well, hey, witches were blamed for everything. They were blamed for the floods. They were blamed for the plagues. They were blamed for the droughts. They were blamed for sickness. They were blamed for any child that ever died. They were blamed for absolutely every malady that you can think of, and every mishap that occurred. And that's, I think I mentioned this earlier, but maybe I missed it, was that when the witch hunters went into a place, what they did was they'd find informers. Does this sound familiar to today? It's happening today. They'd go into a place, they'd have informers, and those informers would go out into the community, and they'd tell them about all these things, who died, whose child got sick, if there was any crops that were ruined, and on and on and on. And then the informants would come back with that information, and then the hunters would say, well, go out and find the names for me of all the single poor women. Go out and find the names of the good-looking women. Apparently those are the ones that made the member move. And then they, go find the hags, go find the crones, go find all of those. So they had lists of names. And those were the ones that got accused. So, I don't know how to tell you how crazy this was, but it was real craziness. And the cats, I've heard that too. I mean, it's not exactly in the court records that the cats died with the witches, but again, the witch's teat was to suckle a cat, to suckle an animal. And remember me talking about that? This isn't television. You can respond. Yes.
I'm interested in evolving the conversation to the present day.
Sure.
And to talk about the dualism that is prevalent nowadays that would cast one's shadow and one's corporate shadow onto groups, similarly to how it was done to the witches and women, and what we can do to prevent that. And Starhawk,
Yeah.
you know who she is,
Yes.
said a few years back, and this time we will not be burned.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so that's rung in my heart through the years, and I like to do shadow work, meaning that we work on our own shadows and don't allow ourselves to be the ones to be afraid and cast our projections out there, and do that in our families and in groups of people so that we are countering that kind of mentality that would create that same kind of thing again and again. And I hear you talking about that being created again now, and yes, we can see it in the Patriot Act and in the talks going on about who terrorists are, and our children. I have a daughter in high school. They're kind of afraid of this. They are talking about the need not to speak out sometimes, and that the fears are still being propagated in the young people. So here's a whole group of us all together on this topic, and I don't know, I just wish it could galvanize us to do everything that we can to do our shadow work so that we're not creating that kind of schism again.
I agree.
But can we keep talking about the
Yes,
present and how to do that?
We can do that. Actually, I teach at SOU, and there was several of my students that were here tonight, so they're getting the message. And they're very excited about all the metaphysical things that they're learning in my class right now. But I just wanted to bring that up because the youth are coming out. Several of the young ladies from my class were sitting in the back row there today. So anyway, anybody else want to talk about, would you like to tell us what your name is? You said you, okay.
I'm Norma Burton. I lead shamanic shadow work groups. I'm the minister of the Unity Church here, and I'm a hospice chaplain.
All right. What would you like to see? Go ahead. Do you have a question? What would you like to see happen tonight, Norma?
I was thankful that you were talking about this, and I'm interested to see all of these people here, that we're all riveted by this subject. So I think it's an important, really important issue in our society right now, because it's potentially on the verge of another mass Holocaust type situation again. Things are getting set up in that direction.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of fear tactics going on. And here in Ashland, we've got an opportunity to be a community of light, not light that excludes the dark, not that, but of a beacon of hope. I don't know, I'd just like to hear from a lot of people about
Me too.
what their thoughts are on this, who some of the people are, who you are that you're interested in this. And so I thank you for bringing the subject to us. And
Thank you for being here. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd be very thrilled to hear stories from people about why they're here and what they'd like to see happen. Oh, we've got one here and here. And women, put your hands up for that microphone.
I think we are in a basic inquisition period right now. You look at the medical monopoly, you look at if you have erroneous beliefs about metaphysics, tell your parents that you have telepathy and have experience with UFOs, and you get to go to the mental hospital. I had this experience. And I think what we need to be careful about is to not get into divide and conquer about anything so superficial as the gender of our present incarnation. I know myself that one of my earliest memories of a past life was developed, and it came into basically that it was probably about in the 1300s. And I was a healer. I was obviously a female healer, a woman of the earth, a shamanistic midwife type person with herbs. And I came into trouble with the Inquisition, and I was brought before the Inquisition, and I was basically burned at the stake. Mm-hmm. And, in this incarnation as a male, I need to relate to the goddess within me, and I need to relate to women as sisters and not as them, and I need to be, and I would like to be related that way myself. So my wish is that we, create the unity and realize that there's a lot of mind control to divide and conquer us up in every way imaginable, and we have to see our essence and our energies of goddess and God within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Well, I dearly wanted to be here for the first part of the presentation. I was not, but I felt compelled to come down here to just, be here and lend support. Those who know me will know that I am not afraid of speaking up. And a couple things come to mind. While you were speaking and the lady in back was speaking, the educational system, the media, politics, religion, et cetera, are kind of in like Dex was saying, and others were thinking, are in a lockstep to create a lot of control. And I've taught Tai Chi and Qigong for about 34 years. And one of the things I found in that is that although I learned to do a very good Tai Chi, which is structure, and do it, quote, perfect, unquote, what I was really coming from in my approach and my type A personality was very masculine principle energy. And so over the last 20 years of teaching, I've endeavored to bring more of the feminine, intuitive, creative, improvisational, playful quality into teaching Tai Chi, and even not only in the way Tai Chi is done, even in the interactive way that I teach it. And it took me a while to get back to this feeling of harmony about it, because even though I was raised in a household of 5 women and never felt women were any really different than men. I mean, there were biological differences, but certainly not as far as accomplishment, skill, and abilities and things. Still, just like many of us, I was, cowed and co-opted by the system. So sometimes it takes us a while to wake up. One of the things that I feel that might be helpful is, since those people that really are completely subjugated, controlled by the systems, the controlling characters on high, when you speak to them, I think it's an interesting but valuable challenge to speak to them in a way that doesn't threaten them, and yet communicates more of the fuller picture, the whole beingness of who we are. I could go on and on, but somebody else, please.
Well, there is an interesting book out called The Alphabet versus the Goddess. Actually, I think it's probably 7 or 8 years old now. But it talked about how when we went from that visual side where we told stories and we looked at the world as a being, and, our place in the world as being, when the alphabet came in and then the printing press came in, it changed how our brain worked. And it sort of ballooned out the masculine side, it sort of brought it to the surface of the hunter-killer side of us. Interestingly enough, the book points out that the printing press came into, well, actually it was really invented in China in 1050, but it was reinvented in Germany in somewhere around 1435. And 100 years later started the witch hunts. And when the printing press got to this continent, it was it was like 1635. Witch hunts began about 60 years later. Now, remember I told you that Germany was where it was the most horrendous of tortures of women. And that's where the printing press was, and that's where literacy became, rose the highest. They make a fairly good argument. I don't know. It's a theory. It's a thought to think about. Okay, yeah.
Hi, my name is Laura DeRocher, and I'm grateful for the comment by the gentleman up front about let's not get into the gender issue, because my belief is no matter what gender we were embodying during those witch hunts, it's in the collective consciousness.
It is.
The fear.
It is.
I know my partner David and I have been talking recently about our lingering fear around speaking our highest truth, for fear of some irrational authority coming down on us. And what I would like to see in our community, because we have such a beautiful consciousness in this community, is how can we help each other feel strong, help each other feel safe, and support each other in speaking that truth when it appears that there's some other authority. And second to that, how can we use what we know now about quantum physics and our mind power to overcome what may seem like a physical threat from some 3D person or persons out there. I don't know how to do it, but that's my wish.
Yeah, mine too. I agree.
Hi, my name's Lexi, and I wanted to make a point about masculinity, and I think in the human race over the past several hundred years and beyond, surely, but masculinity has been perverted, and there is such a deliciousness to masculinity in its more divine aspect, and that's a really important thing for us to remember so that our men can be men in the way that they feel to express it from their hearts, and that those men, the inquisitors and the torturers and everything, that there was also, I don't know if I can say an injustice done to them, but there's a huge pain, there's a huge wounding in the soul, I believe, to hurt another being like they did. And so it's definitely, the women need to heal from it, and we need to support our men in healing from it as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I actually have never felt like I probably was someone who burned. I don't think that was part of my past life. I mean, I definitely think that I probably could have been a persecutor. So, I agree with what you say. I agree with the masculine-feminine thing, too, even though I really posed tonight that the feminine, because we're female, we have embodied this feminine body. And through that feminine body, we really need to express what this earth is about, because this earth is a feminine planet. And, well, we could go on forever. We have another question here.
I'm Bjorg. I work here at the library.
Who has a beautiful voice.
Thank you. I resonated very early with stories about witches, and when I learned the song 30 years ago when I lived in Sweden, it just had to be my song. And here, 30 years later, I finally have the courage to sing it. I know that I have gone through some of the experiences that you talked about. I certainly know that I had my cauldron and potions and all of that. What I And this lifetime, when it came time to give birth to my children, I had a midwife, and nobody could talk me out of that. I had all 4 children at home. That was very natural to me, and it was a wonderful experience. For the discussion tonight, there are requests, what can we do to make it more safe to talk, to speak our truth? Well, here at the library, we have, what's it called, a motto? Making metaphysics mainstream. We do this day in and day out. We have an incredible collection here of all kinds of things, and of course, every Tuesday night there are these meetings. I suggest that every one of us here bring at least one young person and introduce them to the library and to this wealth of knowledge of another fringe dweller, like Christus likes to call it, other viewpoints. And then another point that I want to make, Laura mentioned the quantum physics. Most of us in this room probably saw What the Bleep. We learned there that we create, with our thoughts, with our words, as well as with our actions, we are creating our reality. So I think it is very important for us to always be looking up ahead, always be concentrating on what it is that we want. Yeah, we may feel at times that we need to go and clear out whatever there was from the past, and that's fine for anybody to do that to the degree that they need to do that. But it is so important, in my view, that we never lose track of what is it that we want. And we create that. We see it, we put it out there in the future, and we live it. But bring in 1 or 2 young people to introduce them to a new way of seeing things. Thank you.
Let's remember, too, that quantum physics shows us that we can also change the past. That's what they say, that there's not more than 2 realities, but they're existing side by side. And where was I going with that? Somebody tell me. Quick. Bringing young people in. No, I don't know. Lost it. It's okay. What?
It has a lot to do with forming community.
It does have a lot to forming community. It depends on how we look at it. Oh, I know what I was going to say, is that, I used to think of it that we had past lives, and now I just think about it as we have parallel lives. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for being here. And my name is Andrew, and I'm new to Ashland, and I've been a working organic farmer for about almost 3 decades. I just retired. And it's very important to see and feel that and perceive that, healing the earth and healing the status, that's not a perfect word, but the situation of women, it's one and the same. And in order to go about doing this, it's important to start from the ground up. What I like to see in Ashland and all over the country is small working groups. First start small study groups and become empowered by the history of what the situation is, and then be empowered by seeing a continuum of what happened in the past up to now and where it can go. See it all as indivisible. And I'm glad you brought up about the printing press and the alphabet, because we're sort of tripped up by a linear, straight line world, and a world that's too mental. And the Inquisition was pure mind, and and so we have a system of government and media. It's all just pure mind, and then the power of women is that it's intuition and feeling, and so we have to come back in balance with feeling and our mind, and preserving, protecting salmon streams, forests, and farmland, and and furthering the return of women to their full power. It's one and the same, and so we have to kind of like be in alignment with various forces for good, for environment, for the ecology, for education for our young people, and the feminine empowerment. And so that's I'd love to be part of a working group. There is actually a model in this Northwest. I went to the Pioneers mini conference in Eugene recently, and there was a group, Northwest Sustainable Group. I don't have but they have study groups about how to come back into balance on this earth, with each other, and then out of a study group, can grow a church.
Well, I like what Laura and Norma have suggested already, and why don't we meet afterwards and figure out a plan so that we can do this, so that we can figure out some sort of group that can come together.
How about a Mystics Anonymous, a 12-step?
A 12-step program for Mystics Anonymous.
I'd love to invite you to come to what we have going,
Oh, thank you.
Laura and David and Robert and a bunch of us here
Okay.
are doing this.
Oh,
and,
wonderful.
It's a church, and it's called Ashland Unity Connections, and it's having small groups meet that are building community around doing our shadow work and getting to know one another intimately and around our talents and skills that we bring, and then doing every Sunday rituals around creation-centered spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, this coming Sunday, we're doing a great ritual on the Day of the Dead from a creation-centered spiritual perspective, meaning, where are we going now with our pioneers' consciousness as we are leaving behind old ways of being? How are we evolving as a species and a community? So
Awesome,
it's
good.
a place where you can come. And
Where do you go to?
It meets at the Bellevue Grange at 10:30. So it's a new happening thing in town, and I invite you all
I've actually
to
heard lots of good things
check
about
it
it,
out.
Norma.
Yeah,
Lots of good
I'd
things
love
about
to
you.
be with you there.
Good, thank you.
I just wanted to mention that RE, the Gutenberg printing press, the Bible was the first thing to be printed, and I think the only thing to be printed for many, many, many years before anything else was allowed to be printed. So there's just another little connection.
I don't know. I mean, the Maleficarum came out in like 1460, 35, I think, early, somewhere around 1450. So it couldn't have been, and the press was made in a little bit before that. So I'm not sure of where this would have happened. Yeah, but yeah, and like I said, the Malleus was second to being sales of from the Bible at that time. I mean, the two were, as my friend Sharon said earlier today. She said, "Oh, well, the Malleus was like the second book. It was, it was the sequel to it, sequel to the Bible, sequel to the Bible." Yeah, it's pretty scary. Yeah, go ahead.
My name is Arnie Gross, and the 10 years previous to my moving to Ashland, I had the honor of living on a boat in a houseboat community, one of the more well-known ones in the world. And we had a real sense of community. And we were rough and tough. And I really mean that we were. And yet, like, we had a great deal of respect for women. And women were a very important part of our community. When the developers moved in and moved us out, I came up here with 2 small children and chose to raise them while my wife went to work. By agreement, I identified myself as a house husband. In those days in Ashland, people were confused when they asked me what I did, and I said, I'm a house husband, all right? Now, I got that, I learned that word from a year of women's studies while I was living on the houseboat. I went to college, too, at that time, and I took a year of women's studies. So I understand a lot of what you said. I also think a lot of people I know would have to feel that they need to take issue with a lot of things you said.
I have no doubt about it.
And as Matt mentioned, it's like you have expressed things at times which are a little bit intimidating, and includes me, and I'm shaking my head. I have to make a translation because that's not a part of my life which I say, men do this, men do that. I never did any of those things in my life. I never thought about them. Now, you know, I'm willing to think about them and be open-minded, but I'm not willing to be accused of them. And I think there are other men who feel that way also.
Thank you.
And I could say a lot of other things, but, you know, I respect.
Oh, I have
respect
absolutely
what
no
you're
doubt.
doing. You're setting up a political agenda and a political forum. I would just like to have more of an informational forum and less of a political forum.
Thank you.
I'm Maxine, and I'm a little nervous about doing this, but when you were talking about the earth being feminine, I was remembering a Native American perception of the feminine earth and masculine sky, especially shown like in a rain shower when there's lightning, touches the earth, empowers the earth. So there's an interaction of masculine and feminine that's empowering in that worldview that is you know, definitely outside of the whole Christian church and Inquisition and witch hunt mind view. Also, previous to what you were describing, in some of these countries there was the idea of the horned god, which was a male god that was very powerful, that had antlers, and then, you know, and there was a very powerful exchange of masculinity and femininity with the goddess culture, empowering both common men and women. And it's such a strange substitution. When I was in Flanders, you know, to see instead of you know, a horned male god, male, masculine, wonderful, powerful kind of person, is this poor wretch up, you know, hung up there with thorns, you know, around the head. What a come down. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know that others have spoken and others will want to speak. Just a little postscript and maybe some reactions to certain things. Yeah, I always thought that the Jesus thing was kind of an emasculated symbol in some ways, but I think it was an attempt at androgyny. And one of the other qualities is that fragmented masculine, the part that does its best to ruin and run the world. When you really look at it, what's going on there, it looks like it's coming from great strength and power, but pull the curtain and you see who the Wizard of Oz really is. It's really a frightened child, a frightened little boy. And I think that's a big part of what's going on. And also it's I think the concept of, let's say, one God is an attempt to have that masculine and feminine unified. And if you do a practice like a yogic or a tai chi or another practice that takes that energy and fuses it, that's what the scientists are also trying to do when they make a nuclear bomb or an atomic bomb, because when you unify the masculine and feminine, and the duality becomes one, you have unlimited energy, unlimited power, and it's both masculine and feminine at the same time, and neither.
Yeah, without a doubt, I think that the masculine, the male body the masculinity that is here flowing through in the male body is trying desperately to find that female side. I have no doubt about that at all. And I truly think that we can heal this. We can help everyone. Like I said before, I don't want to point fingers in judgment, but I want to part a curtain. I want us to examine our history. If we don't talk about our history and find out what did happen, then how are we going to move forward or parallel, depending on which physics you're talking about? How are we going to do that without knowing what happened in the past? And, you know, really knowing from in here. A man in the back there asked me earlier about, well, what would these systems look like if women were truly their real selves? If you know, we were as feminine as we could be, which is my hope. What would the systems look like? Or how would that work? And he said, you know, he sees that females would help in the systems. And I agree with that, but I think it works like this. I think it works that we go out and the woman finds where to divine for water, and the male builds the mechanism to get the water out of the ground. That's how we work hand in hand. So, you know, and I think females are desperately looking for their masculine too, except we get told we're not supposed to do that when we do it. But yeah, okay, here and then here.
Yeah, and
oh yeah, go ahead.
And just briefly, yes, and they often glom onto that fragmented masculine and, you know, become a Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
And or get there in the business world and get bigger ulcers and bigger cigars and bigger you-know-whats. Okay. The other thing is Leonard Schlane's Alphabet versus the Goddess is an absolute superb book. Yeah. It's worth studying, not just reading.
It is.
And when the Russians...
I own the company.
The Russians had no literacy, virtually no literacy in Russia at the same time the Germans had, and they had no witch hunts.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Yep. And I imagine they had sexism in Russia at the same time.
Earlier there was some talking you were doing about our history, knowing history. Part of our history in the world of science is there was a point not long ago during the atomic era of research when we made a decision not to explore fusion, but to explore fission. I see that as a decision to continue to split the masculine and feminine. And it's my belief that we would not have not only not an energy crisis, but we would not have the greed and the what is now history in the form of Enron, Conspiracy of Fools, which is what this book is about. I highly recommend it. That is a metaphor for what everything we've been talking about. So I want to put in a word for knowing our history, knowing what the decisions that have been made institutionally that many of us don't even know about, that have determined the reality we live in until we wake up.
Women, what's your experience here?
A number of years ago, an image came to me about how to a visual on male and female oneness, and it was the shape of a pyramid or a building, and it was kind of based on my first experience with community back in 1976 on Maui. It was I was at a Krishna farm, but anyways, there was a this hippie guy on Crazy Pay came there and stayed a few days, and I remember he said something that I never forgot. He says, women are the basis of community, and so without, you know, if you want to create community, you need to have women there in their full flower. But anyways, this image of a building, a structure, you know, the foundation is the feminine, women, and then the walls, the posts that support the structure is the masculine, is men. See, the men's strength, it must be rooted in the feminine for it to be balanced. And then at the top is like the crown, and it's like the part of the structure closest to the heavens, the cosmos. and that's the feminine principle, and it's aligned with before patriarchy and the Judeo-Christian Muslim tradition switched things around as far as religions and churches, and the men pushed the women aside and took over the temples.
I'm going to try to paraphrase Starhawk right now, and I may not do a good job of it, but what she said was that when the healers are taken out of a community, when you start having mistrust, and she's talking about the female healers, when you start having mistrust of the healers, you start having mistrust in all of a community. And that what that does is that turns over the community to be at the hands of others in control, outsiders to be in control. And I just, I take a look at that, and I just wondered, is that part of what has happened with our culture? We have turned away from, our healers have, we have mistrust of, the healing power. And so we're letting someone else have control over us. Yeah, here's
I just want to mention.
Oh, go ahead.
When this woman mentioned the choice between fusion and fission, it reminded me of some of my studies. There's a suppressed history, not only of the witch hunts, but of science and technology. And I'm reminded that there's a feminine technology. And most of our technology is explosive. This is male. And we can't say this is good or bad. This is male. The male is explosive, obviously, right? The female is implosive. And there were some studies I've made and drawings I've seen of implosion motors that were incredibly powerful and very safe and quiet and cool. So these are qualities that, to not just think males are responsible for technology and women for nature. There's a future here. We were talking about where we go. Can we think in a feminine sense about technology that can really liberate things in a great way? And I don't know if there's feminine type bombs and missiles, but
there are, believe me.
Love. Right there. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to. I'd like to tag along with the comment you made about mistrust of the healers. I mean, if we look at, call me a cynic, but the people who are doing the healing nowadays, doctors, American Medical Association, pharmaceuticals, I mean, we've got mistrust of them right now. I mean, do you think that perhaps there will be an upheaval or a change in that arena?
I think we're already seeing it. I think it's already happening. And again, I think that we're seeing again, two cultures that are, we're side by side, because we have, like diversity in here. I couldn't talk about the things that I talked tonight where I used to live in Wyoming. I mean, I would have been, hung on the plaza tomorrow. So I think what we're seeing is we're seeing these two cultures, and we're colliding like this, but we are moving forward. So we have the culture that was the paradigm of yesterday that said we're going to blow up the world and we're the most powerful and we've got the biggest bombs, so nanny, nanny, nanny. And now we have this other culture that's moving in that says, well, there's a better way to do this. We can do this another way. We can work with each other. So I think we're side by side, but I think the medical profession is going to have a real rude awakening one of these days.
And could you also maybe make a few more comments on the definition or the attributes about femininity that you had mentioned about us growing into our femininity type of thing?
Which one? I'm kidding.
Yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit more about this femininity?
What is this femininity stuff?
Right.
What is it?
Well, I mean, I guess, we have the media giving us this definition of what a person is supposed to be who is feminine.
Right.
But, how do we find out what's authentic for ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Well, the media has told us that we have to disappear, which sounds
like little boys.
Well, that too. And which I think you can look right back to the witch hunts. They wanted us to disappear. Women, they wanted us gone. And the carving of our bodies right now And so, yeah, so small. No, you know, what woman is like that? I mean, the goddess of yesteryear was this wonderful bosom person. You know, the earth goddess, the earth mother, was huge. She was a big, wonderful, voluptuous person. So I think our femininity takes us back to those times right now. I think that what we're going to see happen is, I mean, yeah, maybe we're not going to put on that kind of, you know, well, okay, I'm never going to be that bosomy. But anyway, what we can do is we can express who we are. We can express the fact that we are a healer. We are an intuitive person. That there's something about it that we understand what this planet's all about in a very deep, deep way. And we are contained here. So we have a pleasure in just being in our body. You know, we have a pleasure in our sexuality. And I think that's where I think that's what our femininity is about.
My name is Mary, and I've always had a mind that thinks different than everybody else. Thank you very much. It's not always easy, but it's usually fun. I'd like to take this discussion back before religion, back before the feudal system.
You mean the Christian religion?
Any religion.
Okay.
Before the feudal system, when we worked in unison with each other and the planet and the animals and the plants and the weather, not that I have any knowledge of this, but it's seeping into me whether I asked for it or not. I feel, not knowing anything about religion or witchcraft, that these people that were persecuted are people who had this knowledge and retained this knowledge. It had been passed down and they retained it in order to usurp that power, that knowledge, and to take the power away from everybody who has it and instill fear, which dissipates and replaces that power with them having the power and you being silent. I think it would be much more constructive to not focus on the torture of the witches, to not focus on men having a penis and we always wanted one, or vice versa. I must tell you that I knew somebody where I used to live in Santa Cruz, which is an enlightened area. I knew of a professor who was a housemate of a girlfriend of mine, and I was aghast at the fact that he was a transgender person teaching women's studies. On the one hand, we're all male and female, but I thought, well, there's just another job. Somebody who lives it, well, somebody worked really hard. Well, that's like becoming a naturalized citizen. You learn, naturalized citizens know more about how our country works than how we know, because we were born here. But we all think we know how our country is, and it isn't like that right now. It may not have been like that the whole time we thought it was what it was. I'm not sure what I'm saying, but I'd like to, I hope I'm throwing out a few things to ponder on, because, you know, it's a witch in a cauldron, but the cauldron contained herbs that we knew helped heal this and that. Mm-hmm. I just read a book which was suggested to me by somebody who I trust a lot, who's a very interesting person. That book is called Mutant Message Down Under.
Oh, yeah. I interviewed Marla Morgan, actually.
Oh, so you think it's real? It felt real to me.
It is real.
See, so you can back up.
What happened was she caught a lot of flack for saying that her experiences were real. And the book publisher, if you'll notice now, is actually called fiction. But that wasn't fiction, it's real.
Well, I just read it, and I read the preface, and what she said was, I self-published this book originally. Then there was such flack that this is a lie, this couldn't possibly happen, especially since these are black people who have retained this.
It's called Mutant Message Down Under by Marla Morgan.
What it is it's an American woman who goes and does a, what's it called? A walkabout, which is...
with the Aborigines in Australia.
And we have several copies of it in our library.
Which I think in some cultures or beliefs that would be called a vision quest. But it shows these people have lived by rules and not rules, but laws, natural laws for their whole, they haven't been polluted by a modern culture. And they have capabilities that we think are bogus because that couldn't possibly be real.
Yeah.
Anyway, she self-published. There was such a flack. The new preface says, read this as a novel, but this really happened to me. And it was taken from her self-published, and I think 10 years ago, a name brand publishing house, nice, glossy, well-printed. It's an easy read. She says, read it as a novel, but this is truth. And then at the end, there's a statement from somebody who is an Aborigine saying what he has to say.
Yeah, Marlo learned a very difficult way of how to gain her femininity, because she was actually in the medical profession, and she functioned from a very masculine perspective. And I can't remember why she went to. She went to a meeting. Yeah, she went to a meeting in Australia, and she was taken on a walkabout, and there she really learned about her femininity, and she really learned about her spirituality. It's really incredible, and she's really incredible. And you know what? She would come here again. She was here in 1994, probably, 93 or 94, and she would come back if we asked her to come. But right now I have to close this down because we're out of time. I'm sorry. What? One point.
The reason she came to Ashland is that a lot of people.
She came to Ashland because.
And signed a petition for her to come.
Yeah.
And that could be done again.
Yeah, she'll come back and talk to us if we want her to. Thank you so much.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax deductible. This recording is not copyrighted, and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.